So Congress just blocked Trump's Canada tariffs, not Democrats. Congress, 22 Republican senators crossed the aisle, joined every single Democrat, and voted 71-29 to strip the president of his unilateral authority to impose tariffs on Canada. The House followed within hours, 298 to 137, with 61 Republican representatives breaking ranks. Both votes veto-proof, both votes historic, both votes delivering a message that no president of either party has received from Congress in modern American history. You've gone too far, and we're taking this out of your hands. Trump's reaction was immediate. But it wasn't the volcanic, explosive, all-caps social media eruption the world has come to expect. It was something different, something colder, something, according to people who were in the room, far more unsettling. He called 3 of the Republican senators who voted yes. Each call lasted less than 2 minutes. Each ended with 2 words: "You're finished." And then Warren Buffett, at a Berkshire Hathaway shareholders event in Omaha, said something about the American system that nobody expected to hear from a man who has spent the last year issuing what amounted to a series of increasingly devastating eulogies for American economic leadership. When you hear what Buffett said, which Republicans voted yes and why, what Trump did when the veto was overridden, and what this vote means for the damage that's already been done, you'll understand why political historians are calling this the most significant congressional rebellion against a sitting president since Republicans voted to impeach Richard Nixon in 19... Hit subscribe, because this changes everything. Let me take you to the Senate floor. The chamber was full. Every single senator present. No absences, no strategic no-shows, no convenient overseas trips. The galleries were packed with press, congressional staff, and a row of visitors that included notably several farmers from Iowa in worn Carhartt jackets who had driven 11 hours to watch the vote in person. The tension in the room was physical. Everyone knew what was about to happen, but nobody quite believed it would. The bill was called the North American Trade Stability Act. Its lead sponsors were a Republican senator from Iowa, a man who had voted for Trump twice, campaigned with him, endorsed him without reservation, and whose state had been gutted by retaliatory Canadian tariffs on corn, soybeans, and pork, and a Democratic senator from Michigan whose constituents were watching auto plants shut down and gas prices spike because of a bridge blockade and tariff chaos that had turned the Detroit corridor into an economic disaster zone. The 2 men who had barely spoken before this crisis had co-authored the bill in 6 weeks, whipping votes across party lines with a shared argument that was as simple as it was devastating. The president's trade policy is destroying our states, and if we don't stop it, nobody will. The Republican lead sponsor rose to speak. The chamber went quiet. He was a tall man, silver-haired, mid-60s, with the weathered hands of someone who had grown up on the kind of farm his constituents were now losing. He spoke without notes. "I did not come to the United States Senate to destroy the livelihoods of the people who sent me here." He said, "I support this president on many issues. I have defended this president when I believed he was right. But I will not support a trade policy that is closing factories in my state, bankrupting farmers in my district, and raising prices for every family I represent. The people of Iowa did not elect me to be loyal to any one man. They elected me to protect their interests, and their interests require me to vote yes on this bill today." The silence that followed was the kind that exists only in rooms where everyone is holding their breath. The roll call began. The clerk read names alphabetically. The first Republican to vote yes drew a murmur from the gallery. The second drew a louder one. By the 5th Republican defection, the press gallery was in controlled pandemonium. Reporters typing furiously, texting editors trying to keep count. When the 67th vote was cast, the vote that crossed the 2/3 threshold, the vote that made the result veto-proof and therefore unstoppable, there was an audible gasp from the gallery, followed by something that almost never happens in the United States Senate: spontaneous applause. The presiding officer gave her order. The applause continued for several seconds before it stopped. Final tally, 71-29. All 49 Democrats, 22 Republicans. A margin so large that even if every single one of the 22 Republicans had changed their mind under pressure, the bill would still have had more than enough votes to pass on a simple majority. But the veto-proof threshold was the point. The senators didn't just want to pass the bill. They wanted to make it untouchable. They wanted Trump to know that even if he vetoed it, which everyone expected him to do, they had the votes to override. They wanted to end this permanently. The North American Trade Stability Act doesn't just block the current tariffs. It rewrites the rules of the game entirely. Let me walk you through what this bill actually does, because the scope is far more sweeping than the headline suggests. First, it rescinds immediately and completely all tariffs on Canadian goods imposed by executive action under the current administration. Every tariff on steel, aluminum, lumber, dairy, agricultural products, auto parts, and the blanket tariffs on remaining goods. All of them gone, effective upon the override vote. Second, and this is the structural change that will outlast any single presidency, the bill strips the president of unilateral authority to impose tariffs on Canada and Mexico under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act, the national security provision that has been the legal loophole through which every single tariff action against Canada was justified. Section 232 was originally designed to allow the president to restrict imports that genuinely threaten national security, weapons components, sensitive technology, materials critical to defense production. It was never intended to be used to impose 25% tariffs on Canadian lumber or dairy products. The bill closes that loophole for USMCA partner nations permanently. Third, the bill requires explicit congressional approval, a simple majority vote in both chambers, for any future tariffs on Canada or Mexico exceeding 5% on any product category. The president can propose tariffs, the president can negotiate, the president can advocate, but the president cannot act alone. Congress must vote. Fourth, and this is the provision that legal scholars are calling the most innovative piece of trade legislation in decades, the bill includes a snapback mechanism. If any future president attempts to reimpose tariffs on Canada or Mexico through executive action, through any legal theory, under any justification, using any provision of any statute, the snapback clause automatically triggers a congressional override vote within 48 hours. No committee hearings, no procedural delays, no filibuster, a straight up or down vote on whether the tariffs stand or fall. Congress didn't just block these tariffs. They built a constitutional firewall around North American trade policy so thick that no future president of either party can do what this president did without Congress's explicit consent. The House passed the companion bill 4 hours later, 298 to 137. 61 Republican representatives voted yes, nearly a third of the entire Republican conference. Many from the same states that had been systematically devastated by the tariff chaos: Michigan, Alabama, Ohio, Iowa, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Indiana, Tennessee, South Carolina. The rebellion wasn't a handful of retiring members with nothing to lose or moderates in purple districts hedging their bets. It was a broad, deep, geographically diverse revolt by Republicans who had concluded, some reluctantly, some angrily, some with visible anguish on the House floor, that loyalty to the president was no longer compatible with loyalty to the people who had elected them. But the vote totals don't tell you the real story. Numbers don't bleed, people do. The real story is why those Republicans broke what they saw in their districts, what their constituents said to their faces, what finally made the political calculus of supporting the president more dangerous than the political calculus of opposing him. The Iowa senator, the lead sponsor, had watched his state's agricultural economy collapse over the preceding year. Canadian retaliatory tariffs on American corn, soybeans, and pork had closed export markets that Iowa farmers had spent decades building. Farm bankruptcies in the state were up 40% in 12 months. Land values, the measure of wealth that farming families use the way urban families use home equity, had dropped 15%. Farmers who had operated the same land for 4 generations were selling because they couldn't make the loan payments on equipment they'd bought when export markets were open and prices were stable. The senator held a town hall in Polk County 3 weeks before the vote. He expected frustration. What he got was something closer to grief. A 63-year-old soybean farmer named Dale Gunderson stood up, holding a folder of bank statements, and said, "Senator, I've voted Republican my entire life. My father voted Republican. My grandfather voted Republican. We believed in free markets and free trade and keeping the government out of our business. And now the government, our government, the one we voted for, has destroyed my export market, collapsed the price of my crop, and my bank is telling me I have 90 days to refinance or they're taking the land. 4 generations, 90 days." His voice cracked. "I'm not asking you to be a Democrat. I'm asking you to be an Iowan." That town hall was the turning point. The senator told colleagues afterward, "I can survive a primary challenge. I can survive Trump's anger. I cannot survive looking Dale Gunderson in the eye and telling him I chose a tariff policy over his family's farm." The Alabama senator's conversion was even more abrupt. She had initially defended the tariffs publicly on Fox News, with the kind of confident certainty that comes from believing the policy would work. Then Toyota pulled $9 billion out of Huntsville. 4,000 direct jobs, 10,000 indirect jobs, an entire city's economic future gone overnight. The municipal bonds downgraded, the construction workers laid off, the subdivisions frozen, the small businesses closing. The morning after the Toyota announcement, she called the bill's lead sponsor from her car in the parking lot of a Huntsville church where she just met with laid-off construction workers. "I'm in," she said. No negotiation, no conditions, no political calculation about timing or messaging. She'd seen what the tariffs had done to her state, and she was done defending them. Think about that for a moment. A Republican senator in one of the reddest states in America, who had publicly and repeatedly defended the president's trade policy on national television, reversed her position in a single morning because she saw what the policy was doing to real people in a parking lot in Huntsville. That's not ideology, that's not strategy. That's a human being watching her community be destroyed and deciding that no political loyalty is worth that. The Michigan delegation's break was driven by the bridge crisis and the auto plant shutdowns. Both Republican representatives from suburban Detroit districts voted yes. Their constituents were Ford workers laid off from the Dearborn truck plant, GM workers facing layoffs in Flint, commuters paying $5 a gallon for gas, small business owners watching the Detroit corridor, one of the most productive manufacturing regions on earth, choked to death because a bridge was blocked and parts couldn't cross a river. One of those representatives held a town hall in a VFW hall in Livonia, Michigan, 2 weeks before the vote. A UAW member named Tony Serrano, 44 years old, who had worked at Ford's Rouge complex for 19 years, stood up and addressed the congressman directly. "I voted for your president," Serrano said. "I believed him when he said he'd bring jobs back. Instead, he took mine. I'm on temporary layoff because parts are stuck on a bridge. My wife works at a parts supplier that just cut hours. My kids are asking me why I'm home in the middle of the day." He paused. "I'm not asking you to be a Democrat. I'm asking you to take back his tariffs before I lose my house." That exchange was captured on a cell phone video. It went viral within hours, 14 million views across platforms. The congressman voted yes 2 days later. When asked by a reporter whether the video influenced his decision, he said, "Tony Serrano influenced my decision. His family influenced my decision. Every family in my district influenced my decision. The president didn't lose my vote. My constituents won it." Behind the scenes, the pressure was even more intense. Major Republican donors, the financial infrastructure that funds campaigns, super PACs, and the vast machinery of modern American politics began threatening to withhold contributions unless the tariffs were reversed. The Koch network, traditionally aligned with free trade libertarian economics, actively lobbied Republican senators and representatives to support the bill. The Club for Growth, Americans for Prosperity, the National Association of Manufacturers, and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, organizations that collectively represent the economic backbone of the Republican donor class, all mobilized against the tariffs with an urgency that veteran lobbyists described as unprecedented. The money people told the senators, "Your career depends on this vote, not on the president." And then Warren Buffett stepped to a microphone in Omaha and said something that nobody in the room and nobody watching expected. He was at a Berkshire Hathaway shareholders event. The room was full. When he walked to the podium, the audience gave him a standing ovation, as they always do, but this time the ovation lasted longer, carried an emotional weight that was hard to define. The first question from the audience was about the congressional vote. Buffett paused. He took off his glasses. He put them back on, and then he smiled. A real smile, not the wry, pained smile the world had seen from him for the past year. "You know," he said, "people have been asking me for months, years, really, what's wrong with America? What's wrong with the system? Why is everything falling apart?" And I've had some tough things to say. I've used words like demolished. I've used words like obituary. I've moved capital overseas because I didn't trust the policy environment. I've criticized decisions that I thought were harmful and self-defeating, and I meant every word of it. He paused again. The room was absolutely still. But today I want to say something different. What Congress did yesterday, Republicans and Democrats together, from states across this country, that's not what's wrong with America. That is what's right with America. That is the system working exactly the way it was designed to work 237 years ago. The applause started before he finished the sentence. The founders of this country were terrified of concentrated power. That's the whole reason they built 3 branches of government. They wanted to make sure that if one branch went off the rails, if a president, any president, Republican or Democrat, pursued a policy that was destroying the economy and hurting the people, the other branches could step in and say, "No, stop, this has gone far enough. We are a co-equal branch of this government, and we will not allow this to continue." That's what happened yesterday. Congress said no, and that no may be the most important word spoken in Washington in a very long time to turn serious. Now on the economics, let me be clear. These tariffs should have been blocked 18 months ago. The damage they've caused, the factory closures, the farm bankruptcies, the gas price spikes, the capital flight, the alliance damage, the dollar erosion, that damage is real, and some of it will take years to repair. Some of it may never be fully repaired. Congress didn't prevent the harm. They stopped it from getting worse. And sometimes, in my experience, in business and life and medicine, stopping the bleeding is the most important thing you can do before you can start healing. Then Buffett said something that felt like the emotional conclusion not just of this moment, but of everything the country had been through. The tariffs, the trade wars, the factory closures, the bridge blockade, the alliance fractures, the capital flight, all of it. I've said some hard things about American leadership this past year. I've moved Berkshire Capital to international markets. I've questioned the competence and the reliability of American policy in ways I never imagined I would. And I meant it. Every word. But let me say this. He leaned forward. A country that can correct its own mistakes, even late, even imperfectly, even at enormous political cost to the people who cast those votes, is a country that still has a future. I saw 22 Republican senators put their careers on the line yesterday because their constituents were hurting. That's not perfection. That's not wisdom arriving on time. That's messy, painful, democratic self-correction. And it's enough, just enough to make me more optimistic about America than I've been in a very long time. The standing ovation lasted over a minute. Trump, meanwhile, was in a place nobody around him had seen before. According to 4 administration officials who spoke on condition of anonymity, the president watched the Senate vote on television in the residence. He sat in silence as the roll was called, which for Trump was itself unprecedented. When the 67th vote was cast and the chamber erupted, he stood up, turned off the television, and left the room without speaking to anyone. Aides who saw him in the hallway described his expression as blank, not angry, not volcanic, not the red-faced fury they'd witnessed during the bridge crisis or the Carney ambush, something else entirely. One advisor said, "I've seen him angry 1,000 times. This wasn't anger, this was something worse. He looked like a man who just realized his own people don't believe in him anymore." He made 3 phone calls that evening to Republican senators who had voted yes. Each call was brief, less than 2 minutes. Each ended the same way. "You're finished. I will personally find someone to run against you, and I will fund them myself, and you will lose. You're finished." One of the senators, according to a colleague, hung up the phone, sat quietly for a moment, and said, "Well, I guess I'm going to find out if the farmers of Iowa have my back the way I had theirs." The public response came Sunday morning. Trump called the 22 Republican defectors traitors, rhinos, cowards, and worse than any Democrat. He announced he would recruit and fund primary challengers against every single one. He called the bill unconstitutional, a claim that legal scholars from across the political spectrum immediately demolished, pointing out that Congress exercising its Article 1 authority to regulate commerce with foreign nations is not a violation of the Constitution, it is the literal text of the Constitution. He vowed to find other ways to impose tariffs, though legal experts struggled to identify what those ways might be given the bill's comprehensive language. And then he vetoed the bill, as expected. The veto message was 2 pages long and accused Congress of surrendering American sovereignty to foreign nations and globalist interests. Constitutional scholars pointed out that a president accusing Congress of overreach for exercising a power that the Constitution explicitly, unambiguously grants to Congress is a remarkable inversion of how the American system is supposed to work. Within 48 hours, both chambers held override votes. The Senate voted 71 to 29, identical to the original vote, down to every single name. Not a single Republican who had voted yes switched back. Not one. Despite the private phone calls, despite the public attacks, despite the traitor label, despite the explicit promise of funded primary challengers and the full weight of a vengeful presidency bearing down on their political futures, every single one of the 22 held firm. Whatever they feared about crossing Trump, they feared the looks on their constituents' faces more. The House overrode 296 to 139. 2 members shifted, but the margin was still overwhelmingly veto-proof. He vetoed it. Congress overrode the veto. The tariffs on Canada are dead, and there is nothing, no executive order, no emergency declaration, no creative interpretation of presidential authority that can bring them back without Congress's explicit approval. The gavel came down, and for the first time in over a year, the most destructive trade policy in modern American history was over. But the gavel coming down on the tariffs doesn't bring back what they destroyed. And this is the part of the story that prevents any honest person from calling this a victory. It's a correction. It's a course change. It's the system engaging. But it's not a victory, because victories don't leave this much wreckage behind. Markets rallied immediately. The Dow surged over 600 points the day after the override, the largest single-day gain in 4 months. The dollar stabilized against major currencies for the first time in months. Canadian trade officials who had been watching the congressional process with cautious optimism immediately signaled willingness to resume bilateral negotiations on a renewed economic and trade framework. Mark Carney announced that the energy export levies Canada had imposed in response to the bridge blockade and the broader tariff conflict would be reviewed for de-escalation in light of the congressional action, language that diplomats interpreted as the beginning of a deliberate staged withdrawal. The immediate economic bleeding, the acute crisis mode that had defined the U.S.-Canada relationship for over a year began slowly and tentatively to stop. But the wounds are deep. Some of them are permanent, and no congressional vote, however historic, can heal them. Toyota's $9 billion investment isn't coming back to Alabama. The factory complex is already under construction in Ontario. Steel rising, workers hired, production timelines set. The 4,000 direct jobs and 10,000 indirect jobs that Huntsville was promised are being created in Canada. The municipal bonds Huntsville issued to build infrastructure for a factory that no longer exists will be paid by Huntsville taxpayers for the next 25 years. That investment is gone, permanently. The farm bankruptcies already filed in Iowa, Wisconsin, Nebraska, and the Dakotas can't be unfiled. The land already sold at distressed prices can't be unbought. Dale Gunderson's four-generation family farm can't be unforeclosed. The export markets that Iowa soybean farmers spent decades building in Canada, relationships cultivated over years, contracts built on trust and reliability, were destroyed in weeks by retaliatory tariffs and will take years to rebuild if they can be rebuilt at all. Canadian buyers found other suppliers: Australian wheat, Brazilian soybeans, Argentine corn. Those new relationships are now entrenched. The auto workers laid off from Ford's Dearborn plant and GM's Flint assembly line don't get back pay for months of lost wages and uncertainty. The families that drained savings, maxed credit cards, and fell behind on mortgages during the shutdowns don't get retroactive relief because Congress eventually did the right thing. Tony Serrano and his wife don't get those months back. The alliances damaged with Australia, Japan, the European Union will take years of consistent, predictable, reliable American behavior to rebuild. And trust, once broken at the institutional level between nations, doesn't heal on any politician's timeline. The Democratic Prosperity Compact that Carney negotiated with the EU isn't going to be dissolved because Congress reversed a tariff policy. The dollar bypass framework is operational, processing real transactions in real currencies every single day. The currency swap line between the Bank of Canada and the ECB is live and functioning. That alternative financial infrastructure now exists. It will be used, it will be expanded, and it will be replicated by other nations, not because they want to undermine America, but because they now have proof that they need insurance against American unpredictability, regardless of who is president. Congress stopped the policy. They cannot undo the consequences. The tariffs lasted 18 months. The damage will last a decade, maybe longer. Maybe in the case of the dollar's eroding reserve status, much longer. And the Republican Party is now at war with itself in a way it hasn't experienced since the Tea Party insurgency, except this time the fault line runs deeper. Because it's not about ideology or style. It's about whether loyalty to the president or loyalty to constituents takes priority when the two are in direct, irreconcilable conflict. Trump has declared a political vendetta against 22 senators and 61 representatives from his own party. Primary challenges have already been announced in 4 states. Trump has personally endorsed challengers in 3 of them, and his political action committee has committed over $12 million to funding campaigns against the defectors. The message to the rest of the Republican Party is unmistakable: cross me, and I will end your career. But early polling in those states shows something the White House didn't anticipate. In 3 of the 4 states with announced primary challenges, the incumbent Republican defectors are polling ahead of their Trump-backed challengers. In Iowa, the lead sponsor, the senator who stood on the floor and chose his farmers, leads his challenger by 11 points. In Alabama, the senator who flipped after Toyota left is ahead by 7. It turns out that when you vote to save your constituents' farms, their factories, and their livelihoods, your constituents remember. The populist base that follows Trump is powerful, and it is loud, but the farmers who lost their land are powerful too. The auto workers who lost their paychecks are powerful too. The small business owners who watched their dreams dissolve are powerful too, and they vote. The Republican coalition is cracking along a fault line that has been building quietly for years. The populist nationalist wing that defines loyalty as personal allegiance to one man versus the governing pragmatist wing that defines loyalty as delivering results for real people. Whether that crack widens into a generational fracture that reshapes the American political landscape, or whether it seals into another uneasy temporary truce, is a question nobody can answer yet. But the vote, 22 senators, 61 representatives, choosing their oath over their party, has already shifted the internal balance of power in ways no tweet, no rally, and no primary threat can easily reverse. And there's a constitutional dimension to this vote that extends far beyond any single president or any single party. The North American Trade Stability Act doesn't just block these tariffs. It reclaims, formally and structurally, congressional authority over trade policy, authority that Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution explicitly grants to Congress, but that has been slowly, steadily ceded to the executive branch over 50 years through delegation statutes, emergency provisions, and the elastic national security loophole of Section 232. Future presidents of either party will now face a Congress that has demonstrated with a veto-proof bipartisan bicameral override its willingness to assert its constitutional authority over commerce with foreign nations. The precedent is set, the mechanism is built, the snapback clause is loaded. The next time any president attempts to impose unilateral tariffs that damage the American economy, Congress has a template, a legal framework, and the institutional memory of having already done it. So here's where we are. Congress passed the North American Trade Stability Act with veto-proof bipartisan majorities. 22 Republican senators and 61 Republican representatives broke with their own president because their voters were losing farms, factories, and futures. Trump vetoed the bill. Congress overrode the veto. The tariffs on Canada are dead. Warren Buffett, for the first time in a year of increasingly bleak assessments of American leadership, expressed something that sounded like hope, not because the damage has been undone,